Chinatown looks bright in the daytime, but BTK, Born to Kill, moved like a shadow crew with loud footsteps. They were young, hungry, and built on fear. One minute it's protection, the next it's a robbery list, a threat, and somebody getting made an example. BTK didn't just want money, they wanted control. They wanted the whole block to feel them. And the scariest part is how fast it all escalates when a crew starts believing they're untouchable. Because in gang life, respect is currency, silence is survival, and one wrong move can flip a whole neighborhood into war. And once the heat starts rising, it's not only rivals you have to watch. Sometimes it's your own people. But how did it start? And what turned Born to Kill into Chinatown's most feared name? Back in 1848, word spread about California gold. Chinese men, especially from Guangdong's Pearl River Delta, came chasing that gold mountain dream. But the welcome was ugly. Vivian Louis puts it plain. We know from the historical records that there was tremendous anti-Chinese hostility. In 1850, California hit non-citizen miners with the foreign miners tax, basically making Chinese workers pay to even stand on the land. When the gold ran thin, many shifted to the Transcontinental Railroad. The work was dangerous and the pay was lower. Then 1882 slammed the door harder. The Chinese Exclusion Act stopped immigration for 10 years and blocked the people already here from becoming citizens. James S. Lai sums up the trap. They had no other place to go in a very hostile country at that time. And when a community gets boxed in like that, the street starts writing its own rules. With so many doors closed, Chinese immigrants did what people do when the outside world is hunting them. They grouped up. That is how Chinatowns formed in cities like San Francisco, Boston, and New York. These neighborhoods were not just cultural spots, they were survival zones. Many had been contract workers on the railroad after it finished in 1869, and they needed a place to live, work, and stay connected. As they got pushed out of major jobs in mining, farming, transportation, and manufacturing, they leaned into what they could control: restaurants and laundromats. By around 1870, San Francisco had about 300 laundromats, employing nearly 3,000 employees. On the surface, it looked like hard work and small business hustle. Underneath, the pressure was building, because when the law does not protect you, people stop expecting help from the law. And that is when the neighborhood starts depending on its own protection, for better or worse. Even inside Chinatown, the hate did not stop. In the late 1800s, the Yellow Peril era turned discrimination into a daily threat. San Francisco forced goods coming out of Chinatown to be labeled as Chinatown products, like a warning sign. The city stacked more than 30 ordinances targeting Chinese laundromats, and one permit law got used to block Chinese owners over and over until the Supreme Court struck it down for its discriminatory effect. Violence followed the policies. In Denver, an 1880 anti-Chinese riot erased the community. In other places, Chinatowns got burned down after rumors, fear, and racist rules mixed together, so people got more protective of their own turf because they had to. And once a neighborhood is forced to defend itself nonstop, it becomes the perfect place for groups to rise that claim they can handle problems. That is where the next layer steps in. In that climate, volunteer benevolent groups form for support, protection, and advocacy. These were the tongs, often built around hometown ties, family names, or dialects, and connected to older secret society traditions. At first, they helped with housing, jobs, and disputes, but money was a problem, especially when the work was bigger than their own members. So some tongs slid into profitable hustles: gambling, opium, prostitution, human trafficking, and protection fees from merchants. The tongs had soldiers too, the bo hao doi, also known as hatchet men, basically the paid muscle who did hits and handled turf beefs. In New York, the hip sing tong and the on leong tong became major names in that world. What started as community structure slowly turned into a street machine. And when more than one machine wants the same money, the same corners, and the same respect, peace never lasts long. From the late 1800s into the early 1900s, tong wars erupted, especially in places like San Francisco. These wars could kick off over anything from someone disrespecting another tong's honor, to disputes over payment for a trafficked girl, to straight-up murder of a rival member. Each tong had its own game: opium, gambling, prostitution, and territory, and they fought in alleys, streets, and even rooftops. They used blades and hatchets up close, and guns like the Colt .45 when they wanted range. Some crews even used coded street talk. A kill could be described as wash his body. A rifle could be a dog, a pistol a puppy, and bullets dog feed. When a leader wanted shots fired, the call was, Let the dogs bark. Over time, crackdowns and community pushback hit the tongs, and the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fires destroyed major vice spots that funded them. The wars faded, and by 1921, San Francisco's last tong-related murder had passed into history. But the playbook never really disappeared. It just waited for the next generation to pick it up. By the 1930s, things looked calmer. Chinatown. Leaders pushed a cleaner public image, more tourist-friendly, fewer open killings, less obvious vice, even if some of it still lived under the radar. Then 1965 changed the game again. Immigration laws targeting Chinese people were repealed, and the flow jumped hard, from as low as about 100 a year to about 20,000. Many newcomers came from Hong Kong, sometimes from tougher conditions, and they did not always fit into the older networks run by American-born Chinese. That clash created space for younger guys to form street crews. Names like Ghost Shadows and Flying Dragons started ringing out, and Chinatown got more violent again in the 1970s. These gangs were tied into Tong influence, which helped restore a system, the kind that controls chaos with rules and payoffs. But even with the system, the streets stay hungry. And once that hunger's back, it is only a matter of time before a new crew shows up ready to prove they are built different. After 1975, the US takes in over 130,000 Vietnamese refugees. This first wave is seen as the more established crowd: professionals, merchants, and people tied to the South Vietnamese government or military. A lot of them settle in Southern California and start building real communities, the kind with roots and support systems. But this is not the group that becomes the face of BTK. The gang story grows out of the later wave, the one people call the lost generation, and they are coming in with a very different kind of damage. Because while the first wave is trying to rebuild life, the next wave is trying to survive it. And that difference is where the streets start getting loud. The later wave is made up of boat people, poor and desperate refugees taking dangerous trips by boat and ship after the war. This crisis peaks in the late 1970s and early 1980s and keeps going into the 1990s. Author Nguyen M. Vo and the UNHCR say between 200,000 and 250,000 boat people died at sea, which tells you the level of fear people were willing to face. Many survivors land first in Hong Kong and in Southeast Asian places like Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and more. The US ends up among the countries resettling the most, with 402,382 arrivals counted in that larger flow. But for the ones who make it, the trauma does not end on the shoreline. That part is only the entrance. A lot of these refugees end up stuck in Hong Kong refugee camps for years, living in harsh conditions. Some are ethnic Chinese from Vietnam, and after China-Vietnam clashes in 1979, they get treated badly, pushed around, and blamed. Some are children of Vietnamese women and American soldiers, treated like outcasts, like they belong nowhere. The camps also hold many unaccompanied minors under 16, kids surviving without parents, without a real safety net, and without anyone teaching them how to live normal. By the early 1980s, gangs even form inside the camps, because that is what happens when young people grow up surrounded by pressure, fear, and no rules that protect them. The camp becomes the training ground, and the streets are the graduation. By the early 1980s, Vietnamese crews in the US start gaining a reputation that makes other crews pay attention. Older Vietnamese criminals who arrived in the late 1970s and early 1980s run brutal home invasions. The method is cold and calculated. They follow Asian business owners home, knowing many are cash-based, less likely to use banks, and less likely to call police. One example described through a New York Times mention is Savage. In 6 weeks, 9 businessmen in Boston get hit by young Asian gangs armed with automatic weapons and machetes, with families beaten and robbed. Vietnamese gangs do not have the same structure that Chinese tongs and community networks had, so instead of rules, it is raw force. And that raw force earns respect in the underworld. Chinese gangs start admiring the toughness, and they begin using Vietnamese as enforcers. That is the setup for the kind of crew BTK becomes. Now bring in the key figure, David Tai. He is born in Saigon in 1956, and as a kid, he is already hustling. He works as a go-between for American GIs, looking for drugs in the underground markets, learning how money moves when it is dirty. His father gets imprisoned by communists, and when Saigon falls in 1975, Tai gets airlifted out onto an aircraft carrier. He passes through Hong Kong briefly, then gets placed in a church-run foster home in Lafayette, Indiana, but he does not stay put. In May 1976, he runs away with $150 and heads straight to New York City, sleeping in Port Authority for the first couple nights. That is not a fresh start. That is a kid walking into a predator city with nothing but nerve. In New York, Tai survives by bouncing job to job, doing waiter and kitchen work in Chinese restaurants. At one point, he works as a dishwasher for the Rainbow Room on the 65th floor of the RCA building, while learning how the city hides its real economy behind bright lights. In 1978, he briefly goes to New York University, meets a fellow Vietnamese refugee from Da Nang, and they marry fast. Within months, she is pregnant. They drop out and move into a cramped apartment in Hell's Kitchen. Tai has a kid, bills stacking, and jobs that do not pay enough. This is the moment where the street starts whispering a different option. And when Tai listens, it does not sound like a warning. It sounds like a plan. Even while trying to live straight, Tai starts dabbling in counterfeit watches, building a small setup in his apartment. He keeps drifting toward Canal Street because that is where the money is moving, and he is looking for financial possibilities. In 1983, he becomes a member of the Flying Dragons, one of the biggest Chinatown gangs at the time. But because he is Vietnamese, he and other Vietnamese members get cut off from the main money-making operations. They get pushed into their own subgroup, the Vietnamese Flying Dragons, used for the riskiest and most dangerous jobs. The way they are viewed gets summed up in one degrading label: coffee boys. That is the kind of insult that creates a chip you cannot scrape off. And Tai is not the type to stay small forever. Sometime between 1986 and 1987, Tai leaves the Flying Dragons. He sees no future rising inside a Chinese gang, and he starts solidifying control over the counterfeit watch industry in Chinatown. Around this same time, Vietnamese youths are arriving in the city, many of them boat people separated from family, struggling to survive in Manhattan Chinatown. The social services and banks mainly cater to Chinese speakers, creating a language barrier, and without older Vietnamese generations in New York, there is no pipeline for housing. So the newly arrived kids who cannot afford rent end up on the street. Tai's name starts traveling through back alleys, pool halls, and skating rinks, the kind of places where hungry kids gather. People hear about a well-dressed guy who can take care of his own, and they start coming to him. Tai gives money, advice, sometimes a place to live, and the circle forms. Then police crackdowns weaken major gangs, creating a vacuum. Tai decides it is safe enough to break away without Tong permission, a move that can get a founder killed. He does it anyway, and that is the moment the Canal Street story turns into a war story. Canal Street is the tourist and bootleg hub, the place where fake watches and bags become street currency. Tai sets up shop in that territory and builds what becomes known as the Canal Street Boys, pulling in Vietnamese enforcers connected to the Ghost Shadows and Flying Dragons scene. He recruits teenagers, some as young as 13 to 15, grabbing runaways, orphans, pool hall kids already stealing. He gives them flop houses with Sunset Park and Coney Island mentioned, plus food, pocket money, and for some, women and drugs wrapped in a family feeling. Tai becomes a near godlike father figure, and later a gang member tells investigators Tai was the only one who cared and looked out for them. But that care comes with a price tag. The crew starts working Canal Street hard, extorting shops, robbing restaurants, protecting brothels and massage parlors they control, and robbing the ones they do not. The money stacks fast and the block starts hearing the same message in different forms: pay up or get touched. And once a crew gets used to easy money, they do not get quieter, they get bolder. The crew stands out because they are louder, more aggressive, more reckless. They hit robberies and shootings in broad daylight, then disappear into safe houses or Times Square hotel rooms like ghosts. Their look becomes part of the brand: pompadour or spiky haircuts, tattoos, a vibe that screams they are not here to blend in. And while his soldiers are wilding out in the streets, Tai is leveling up in real life. He drives a Jaguar, and he has a big house on Long Island, the kind of setup that tells people he is not just surviving anymore, he is winning. Tai runs the watch operation like a straight-up threat play, and his method is simple: buy my watches or I'll kill you. The fake Rolex racket is not random either. The watches come in from Hong Kong, and Tai keeps a distribution network moving through the city, with the real engine sitting far from Canal Street. His Long Island house has a basement that works like a warehouse and factory, a quiet place where the business can breathe while the street stays noisy. Sometimes he plays the middleman too, claiming he can stop the Vietnamese youths from extorting and robbing businesses, but only if the merchants buy his merchandise. Police raid his Canal Street store multiple times. At one point, when police gather outside, Tai orders members to shower them with firecrackers from the top of the building. He claims repeated raids cost him $100,000, and his response turns darker. He orders one member to blow up a police vehicle. The explosion wrecks the unattended car, wounds 2 officers, and leaves 11 bystanders with minor injuries. Around the same period, he is charged for forgery devices, accused of holding 41 printing stamps used to alter 2,000 wristwatches by imprinting brand names like Rolex and Cartier. His defense tries to get it dismissed, arguing possession alone does not prove intent to defraud, but the motion is denied. By the end of 1988, Ty is not thinking small anymore. He starts meeting with top guys and planning something bigger than a single Canal Street crew. He wants structure, reach, and a name that makes every smaller group fall in line. Then comes the bigger shift. In June 1989, Ty holds a major gathering in a Japanese restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. Nearly everyone attends, and it is not just local kids. He brings in Vietnamese gang bosses, the D-Los, from around NYC and beyond, with places like Connecticut, the Bronx, and Jersey City specifically in the mix. He makes it strictly clear that separate Vietnamese factions will go under one banner, Born to Kill. It becomes a federation of crews, and Ty becomes the head, the on high. That nickname is not just style, it is a command. At that meeting, Ty forces members who want in to sign a paper contract passed from table to table. It lays down street rules in plain terms. Do not betray your brothers, never cooperate with police, and never undertake criminal action without clearance from your D-Lo. He says members can leave, but only if they scrape their BTK tattoo off their skin, leave New York City altogether, and never return. That is not a club rule, that is a leash. And the tattoo itself is not some full-body movie-style thing. It is described as the initials, plus a coffin with 3 candles, a simple mark that still carries a heavy message. It turns a loose set of hungry kids into a controlled structure, a hierarchy, with Ty at the top acting like a protector to the Vietnamese community in Chinatown while building a machine that feeds off fear. People describe him as sly, shrewd, lethal, and looking more like a businessman than a gangster, in a tailored sports coat, silk shirt, and soft leather loafers, with sunglasses like a shield. Later, when he is finally arrested on murder charges and other indictments, he boasts on 48 hours that he made $13 million from counterfeit watches in 1988 alone, and whether that is profit or revenue, the point is the same. The crew is no longer a street rumor. It is a full operation, and once a machine like that gets organized, the next thing is always the same. Somebody gets greedy, somebody gets jealous, somebody gets hurt. On the afternoon of August 5th, 1989, Ty is standing in front of the shopping mall in the middle of BTK turf on Canal Street with a few associates when 2 flying dragons walk up and start running their mouths at him and the crew. The disrespect jumps up a level when one of them spits on the sidewalk, a loud signal meant to embarrass Ty and stain BTK's name right on their own block. Ty does not argue back in front of everybody. He walks away, goes behind the Asian shopping mall, heads into the Pho Hanoi restaurant cellar, and grabs 2 handguns like he already decided how this ends. He hands them to 2 nearby BTK members and gives a simple order. Go shoot those. One of the shooters runs straight back to the front of the mall, and in broad daylight on Canal Street, pulls out a .38 caliber pistol and drops both flying dragons. One gets hit in the side of the head. The other gets hit through the lung and aorta. Store owners start closing up fast. And even though several shopkeepers saw it, when law enforcement comes asking questions, nobody says a word, because on that street, snitching means you are next. After that double murder, the message is clear. BTK is not playing by Chinatown's old script, and other crews notice the way they are wilding out. Ty's mindset is that Chinatown's traditional power structure does not include the Vietnamese, so the Vietnamese are not bound by those rules, and BTK can rob or kill whenever and wherever they want. That attitude is exactly what disrupts the natural order, the one that used to keep heat away from the bosses. Before this era, when gangs wanted to send a message, it could be property damage, like breaking windows, not bodies dropping in public. But now it is direct violence, and it is loud enough that even places that were traditionally not targets, like bars and nightclubs, start turning into shooting scenes. BTK does not just hit random spots either. They start robbing karaoke joints, casinos, and businesses that are under other gangs' protection, basically taking money out of other crews' pockets and daring them to respond. And once that line gets crossed, the street always demands payback. BTK keeps pushing it, hitting places controlled by other Chinatown crime syndicates like they own the whole map. One example is a robbery at a gambling den at 1 Catherine Street, where a group of 6 gang members strips customers in the basement of their cash, jewelry, and credit cards, and that includes some tong leaders too. That is not just theft, that is humiliation. It is BTK walking into somebody else's house, taking what they want, and leaving the owners alive just so they remember it. The more this happens, the more the old guard feels the whole neighborhood is sliding into chaos, and the more pressure builds to shut Ty down. But pressure does not always come from cops first. In Chinatown, it often comes from the Underworld elders, and that is where the next warning starts forming. Then comes another flashpoint that makes the situation feel out of control. BTK members get kicked out of a Ghost Shadows bar, and instead of taking the L and walking away, they send a 15-year-old inside to shoot the place up. 2 people die, 2 more get injured. That is the kind of reckless move that changes the tone for everyone watching, because it shows BTK is willing to use kids as shooters and turn any spot into a crime scene. This is the type of violence that makes residents and business owners nervous, the kind that spreads faster than rumors. A journalist named Peter Lee, who covered Chinatown for Chinese language newspapers, puts it in plain words. I used to tell people who asked me that those stories about gang violence are just sensationalism, but now I tell them to be careful. I feel leery myself sometimes, walking down the street, and that was never true before. When a neighborhood reporter starts sounding like that, you know the street is boiling. And when the street boils, the people with real influence step in. Sometime in the summer of 1990, Tai gets personally requested to attend a meeting by Kai Sui, Benny Ong, the advisor for life of the Hip Sing Tong, known around Chinatown as the godfather of Chinatown, or Chutsuk, meaning Uncle Seven. Benny Ong demands a Kong Su, Underworld slang for a negotiation, because BTK's recent moves have made the whole Chinatown criminal infrastructure unstable. The feeling is that a sit-down could have offered Tai a deal, keep his rackets and keep control of Canal Street, but give up the reins over his gang brothers. A lot of people in the Chinese community think Tai should feel honored to even be invited, but Tai does not respond. He snubs Uncle Seven and does not show. In this world, ignoring a meeting is not neutral. It is disrespect, and disrespect always gets answered, even if it takes time. After the snub, Tai's right-hand man at that point, Vin Vu, gets gunned down at a street corner at 1 a.m. after leaving a BTK-run massage parlor in Chinatown, when he and a companion are waiting for a taxi. Vin is 21, described as the number 2 man in Born to Kill, and in the crew he is loved, even nicknamed Amigo because everybody got along with him. His murder gets framed as a message from the established order, the Tongs and their street enforcers, because BTK kept robbing other gang spots, extorting protected shops, and killing in daylight. The funeral procession starts on July 28, 1990, and runs over 2 days, drawing between 125 to nearly 200 mourners. The service is directed by the Wa Wing Sang Funeral Home, and the owner says it is paid for by men who do not identify themselves. 6 pallbearers carry the coffin as BTK members march through the heart of Chinatown from Mulberry to Bayard Street, openly parading the BTK banner until police get into a quick scuffle and the banner gets folded. After weaving through 7 or 8 of the densest blocks, the entourage stops at Canal Street, loads the coffin into a hearse, and mourners pack into 20 limousines, rolling toward the Holland Tunnel and then to Rosedale Memorial Park Cemetery. At around 2:30 p.m., as mourners gather around the casket, BTK members start a Vietnamese custom, burning the deceased's belongings so he has something to wear in heaven. Then 2 or 3 men dressed like mourners walk up with flowers, drop them, pull guns, and open fire into the crowd. 5 mourners get wounded. Then the chaos explodes as BTK members return fire, bullets smacking gravestones while people duck and scatter. In the end, 7 people are shot, and somehow nobody dies. The gunmen escape in a red car, and the footage hits local and national news, turning BTK into public enemy number 1. And the wild part is, even after all that noise, the real question is still hanging in the air. Who really called that hit at the cemetery, and how far was this war about to go? After the cemetery shootout, Chinatown does not explode again right away. It goes quiet, not safe, not calm, just tense. Gangsters stop hanging outside, business owners stop talking. Everyone feels like something worse is coming. Inside BTK, the pressure starts turning inward. Tai believes ghost shadows were behind Amigo's murder, possibly acting on Uncle Seven's behalf, but nothing is ever proven. That uncertainty poisons everything. Around the same time, BTK starts shifting operations out of New York because Chinatown feels too hot. But before they can fully move, the violence accelerates. In August 1990, during a robbery, one BTK member accidentally shoots another BTK member in the head. It is friendly fire, no rivals, no police, just chaos inside the crew. Then in October 1990, 3 BTK teenagers are found executed in Ghost Shadows territory. 2 are 17, 1 is 16. They are marched out of a karaoke parlor, lined up and shot in the back of the head. The message is brutal and clear. The war is no longer just external. BTK is bleeding from the inside, and everyone can feel that the streets are starting to turn on them. As the pressure builds in New York, Tai starts pushing BTK outward. Chinatown feels burned, too much heat, too many eyes, so he looks north first. Bridgeport, Connecticut, about 90 miles from New York. Ty opens a brothel there with a madam he is dating at the time, after divorcing earlier. BTK starts building robbery lists focused on Asian-owned businesses. The logic is cold but simple. Cash-heavy businesses, language barriers, fear of police, low reporting, easy intimidation. It is the same playbook they used in Chinatown, just moved to new ground. After Bridgeport, the crew keeps rolling south. Gainesville, Georgia becomes another target zone. By this point, there are around 500,000 Vietnamese refugees living in the United States, and BTK sees opportunity everywhere. But while the gang spreads out geographically, law enforcement is finally catching up. Investigations are stacking, informants are talking, and Ty does not realize yet that the clock is already running out. On January 21st, 1991, BTK hits Golden Star Jewelry at 302 Canal Street in Manhattan. The store is not picked at random. Sin Van Ta has been refusing to pay extortion money, and his shop sits close to Ty's massage parlor, right inside BTK's core territory. Hitting Golden Star is meant to be both a payday and a warning. Ty personally selects the crew, including Jimmy. The robbers force the owner, Sin Van Ta, and his employees to the floor. They steal jewelry and cash and beat some of the workers before fleeing in a Cadillac. Police spot the getaway car and give chase. During the pursuit, the occupants throw guns and ammunition out the windows. The Cadillac crashes. Huang Nano and others are arrested. Police arrest 4 members in the Cadillac, but another gang member escapes using a second vehicle and later meets up with Ty, delivering most of the stolen jewelry directly to him. That same night, Jimmy brings Ty a separate bag of jewelry from the robbery. The members arrested later plead guilty in state court. But for Ty, the robbery is only the beginning of a much bigger problem. After the robbery, Sin Van Ta cooperates with police. He identifies several of the robbers in a lineup. Ty responds fast. He speaks with Ta and an employee, then later tells his crew he convinced them not to testify. But Ta does not back down. Soon after, Ta receives an anonymous letter containing broken glass and a newspaper article about the robbery. The message is clear without words. Ty later approaches Ta again, this time telling him to go to court and say the arrested BTK members were not the robbers. Ta ignores him and opens his store anyway. For BTK, this crosses a line. A shop owner who talks to police is not just a problem, he is a threat. In February 1991, BTK starts its regular extortion rounds on Canal Street. When they reach Golden Star, Ta refuses to pay. He tells them his store was just robbed. LV Hong and others return and berate him. Ta reports the incident to police and identifies LV Hong and another BTK member. Arrests are made, but the men are later released. Once free, LV Hong reports back to Ty. Ty's response is direct. He says he wants to solve the problem at 302 Canal Street, calling Ta the one who called the policeman. At a meeting with ranking members, Ty declares the store owner has to be taken out. According to later testimony, Ty puts it bluntly saying, "This store owner have to be taken out." Again calling Ta the one who called the policeman. Lan Tran volunteers to handle it. At that point, the decision is no longer about money. It is about control. On the evening of March 10, 1991, Lan Tran and Kenny Vu travel to Chinatown. As Golden Star Jewelry is closing for the night with family present, Lan Tran enters the store. He shoots Sin Van Ta in the head, killing him execution style. The murder shocks the neighborhood. A cooperating witness is now dead. For BTK, it sends a message. For law enforcement, it changes everything. From this point forward, the case is no longer just robberies and extortion. It is murder tied directly to silencing a witness. Around the same time, BTK tightens his grip on E5 Communications, a beeper and cell phone store used by the gang. They demand free beepers or deep discounts. When E5 resists, BTK threatens disruption and even says they will blow up the store. Eventually, E5 gives BTK a 33% discount. When services are cut for non-payment, gang members show up demanding restoration. Mindo later returns with LV Hong and Lan Tran, calling themselves Dai Los and forcing the store to comply. In July 1991, when E5 turns off LV Hong's service again, LV Hong and Lan Tran return and force restoration once more. The pattern is clear. Compliance is demanded. Resistance is punished. On March 25, 1991, Ty approves a robbery of E5 Communications. He instructs LV Hong, Jimmy, and others to carry it out. The crew steals a phone, about $2,000, and personal jewelry. After the robbery, E5 is told the reason it happened is because the store refused to provide free beepers. The message is simple: pay or get hurt. Even businesses already under pressure are not spared. In mid-April 1991, Nigel Yagmohan and others rob a Canal Street jewelry store. During the getaway, their car crashes. Jagmohan later claims he threw away the bag of stolen jewelry while fleeing. LV, Hong, and Tai confront him at a safe house. What follows is brutal. Jagmohan is beaten with a radio and a cutting board. He is kicked repeatedly. Afterward, he is ordered out. Inside BTK, discipline is enforced through violence, and mistakes are paid for in blood. In early May 1991, Tai plans a robbery at Ming Jewelry Store in Rochester. He instructs Lantron, Mindo, Tin Ngo, and Sun to carry it out. Tai tells them that if employees resist, they should be shot in the head. But by this point, Tin Ngo is already a government informant. Police stop the crew before the robbery happens. Weapons and ammunition are found, but the men are released to protect the informant's cover. Tai does not yet know that someone inside his circle is talking. In early August 1991, Tai claims he has been offered $10,000 to bomb Pho Bang restaurant. He says Min Do bombed the wrong restaurant earlier. Tai gives Tin Ngo a homemade bomb and instructions on how to use it, telling him to recruit a new member. A man known as Tom is brought in, with Hai acting as lookout. Before the plan can be carried out, police intervene. The crew is arrested with the bomb in their possession. By now, BTK is being watched closely from every angle. Around the same time, BTK plans a robbery at Sun Moon Trading. The plan involves Italians posing as federal agents. The crew intends to load watches into a van and drive them to Long Island. The plan is scrapped when the Italians spot police surveillance. BTK is starting to realize they are no longer invisible. In August 1991, federal enforcement moves in. After months of investigation aided by a former gang member turned informant who wore a wire, authorities raid Tai's house in Melville, Long Island. Tai and many leaders are arrested. Police find unregistered firearms, multiple explosives, and a counterfeit watch factory in the basement. With Tai in custody, victims begin cooperating without fear. The wall of silence cracks. The government brings a 21-count superseding indictment against 12 defendants. Charges include RICO participation, RICO conspiracy, Hobbs Act robberies, extortion, murder conspiracy tied to Sen Van Ta, and bombing conspiracy tied to Pho Bang. The trial uses an anonymous jury. Evidence includes more than 80 witnesses, taped conversations, guns, ammunition, and homemade bombs. Insider witnesses include former members and informants. Tai denies being the leader and claims BTK never existed. His lawyer calls him a hardworking refugee whose biggest crime was making watches and selling them without a license. Later, Tai changes his story and claims he was not even in New York during many of the crimes. Tai is convicted and sentenced to 2 concurrent life terms, plus additional concurrent sentences, in order to pay $413,285 in restitution. Investigators later point out the gap between Tai's image and reality. While many gang members barely scrape by, Tai drives a Jaguar and lives comfortably on Long Island. Detective William Oldham compares him to Fagin from Oliver Twist, a man who poses as a protector of lost boys while quietly profiting off their crimes. Lan Tran and Jimmy also receive life sentences. Other members receive long prison terms. In 1994, the appeals court upholds almost all convictions, reversing only 1 count tied to the Pho Bang bombing conspiracy due to motive requirements. The rest stands. BTK collapses. Members flee. The crew that once ruled Canal Street through fear is dismantled piece by piece. And even as Tai writes poetry from prison and presents himself as a benefactor, the record shows something else: a gang built on intimidation, betrayal, and violence that ultimately destroyed itself from the inside. Decades later, the streets are different, but Tai's name still sits in the court system like unfinished business. By 2020, David Tai is not a street boss anymore. He is an aging lifer serving time for murder and racketeering, and he is trying to get out because of COVID. In March, he sends a letter through his lawyer to a federal judge in Brooklyn, basically saying his health is bad and catching the virus could put him in the ground. His lawyer lays out the plan like it is simple and clean. If Tai is released, he will live with his sister and brother-in-law in Texas. The letter also says Tai is being held at a federal medical facility in Massachusetts, which already tells you how serious his health issues are being framed. But even with all that, the court is not looking at Tai like a sick old man first. The court is looking at him like a guy who once ran a crew that used fear like currency. And the big question becomes, is he still that guy even from a hospital unit? The government response hits hard. Because prosecutors do not argue feelings, they argue danger. A federal prosecutor tells the judge Ty should stay locked up because he still poses a risk to the community, and they do not talk about him like some retired criminal. They talk about him like an operator who built systems. They write that under Ty's leadership, Born to Kill murdered a state's witness, ran robberies across the country, and ran a valuable extortion scheme in Manhattan's Chinatown. Then they spell out the mechanics of how Ty moved, planning robberies, picking which soldiers would do the dirty work, supplying firearms, running safe houses where members lived, and ordering murders of people who reported violence to police. And the line that makes it feel cold is the idea that Ty could organize extreme violence even from afar, meaning distance never saved anybody from his reach. It is not just he did bad things, it is he knew how to make bad things happen on command. And when prosecutors paint you like that, the judge is not just deciding a release request. The judge is deciding whether a ghost can still pull strings. At the time of that filing, Judge Carol Amon has not ruled on Ty's release. So the story sits in this weird tension. On one side, you have a man saying he is vulnerable, sick, and trapped in a facility where a virus can spread fast. On the other side, you have the government saying the danger is not about his lungs or his age. It is about his mindset and his history. This is the part that always messes with people. Prison is supposed to be the end of the road, the part where the story stops. But here the system is still treating Ty like the same chess player, like the same shot caller, like the same man who could light a fuse without showing his face. And that is why the judge's decision matters so much. Because if Ty ever touches the outside again, the conversation changes from what he did back then to what he could still do now. And while that court fight is happening, the BTK name starts doing something strange in the background. It does not fully die, it just mutates. By 2021, the idea is that BTK mostly fades away. The old crew that terrorized Chinatown is not moving like it used to. The structure is not the same, and the original era is gone. But the name does not vanish like smoke. It pops up later like a franchise, like a label people still carry. And that matters because names have power in gang culture. A name can open doors. A name can pull old loyalties back to life. A name can make a situation feel bigger than it is. That is why a modern example hits so hard, because it shows how past ties do not stay buried just because time passed. When people say a gang is dead, that usually means the crew's not active in the same way. It does not always mean the relationships are gone. And in this case, the relationships show up again in Philadelphia, tied to a debt, a plot, and a level of violence that feels like it belongs in a different decade. The scary part is not just what happened, but how easily old connections got activated like a switch. In Philadelphia, prosecutors describe a man named Lam Trieu as someone reputed to have once been a ranking member in the Vietnamese gang that terrorized New York City's Chinatown in the 1990s, Born to Kill. And in federal court, Trieu admits he played a leading role in a plot to collect a drug debt that ended with 2 men dead in the river. But he tries to separate himself from the worst part of it. He insists he never intended what happened that night in August 2014, and he says it straight to the judge. "I did not mean for anyone to be beat or killed. I just meant for them to be scared." That quote is important because it shows how he wants the court to see him, not as a killer, but as someone who was trying to apply pressure. The problem is, pressure in gang culture is never a soft thing. Once you send people to handle business, you're gambling with the outcome. And the court is not only hearing what Trieu claims he wanted, the court is also hearing what actually happened to the victims. Federal prosecutors describe the murders of brothers Viet and Vu Kevin Huynh as one of the most vicious incidents of gang violence Philadelphia has seen in years. The brothers are kidnapped and tortured for hours, then driven to the river. They are stabbed dozens of times, blindfolded with duct tape, weighted down with cement, and thrown into the Schuylkill. That is not sending a message. That is torture and disposal, like the goal is to erase them. And there is one detail that makes this even darker. A third man is taken and attacked with them, but he manages to climb out of the river, flag down police, and survive long enough to testify later. That survivor turns this into more than rumors and street talk. Now there is a living witness, a person who can describe what happened, which is exactly the kind of thing gangs fear because it turns a street crime into a courtroom story with names, timelines, and consequences. And once that happens, the investigation does not stop until every thread gets pulled. The way the case is described, Trieu's old BTK ties are what lead him into this situation. Investigators describe both Trieu and Tam Min Lee as former ranking members of Born to Kill, the gang named after a slogan painted on some U.S. soldiers' helmets during the Vietnam War. The background they give is blunt, and the history matters because it shows why calling someone former BTK is not just trivia, It is a signal. It tells you this person came from a world where intimidation was normal and violence was business. So when a debt problem shows up years later, the solution they reach for is not paperwork, it is muscle. Tria Yu admits he reached out to Lee, his old BTK associate, to collect a $300,000 debt owed to a marijuana supplier in California. Lee had fronted drugs to the Hoon brothers, known South Philadelphia drug dealers, and Trio travels to Philadelphia with 3 others to get payment. The allegation is that Trio instructs Lad to abduct the brothers and, if necessary, bring them back to New York as hostages. But then Trio returns home, and what happens next is the part he claims he never wanted. The men and Lee bundle the brothers into a van, take them to Lee's house in Eastwick, torture them, and then drive them to the grandstands along Boathouse Row, where they are stabbed and tossed into the river to die. Tria insists he is furious when he learns what happened hours later, like he is shocked by how far his own play went. But the prosecution's view is simple. Whether he wanted murder or not, he helped set the machine in motion, and machines do not always stop where you want them to stop. By the time the case reaches federal court, Trieu is one of 6 men charged in connection with the plot and the killings. Tam Min Lee is described as the primary captor, and he is arrested on state murder charges and sentenced to death shortly after. But investigators say it takes years to track down the other people involved. Trieu ends up arrested in 2018 on charges connected to conspiracy, drug distribution, and collecting credit through extortionate means, and those charges carry the kind of weight that could have buried him for life. The story also includes something that shows how complicated justice can get with older gang figures. Trieu had been ordered deported after serving his last sentence in the 1993 case, but Vietnam refused to take him back. So the US releases him on immigration parole, and he lives in Queens with his wife and children, working in a dim sum restaurant until shortly before his arrest. That detail matters because it shows how someone can be both free and not truly free, living normal life on the surface while old connections and old reputations still follow behind them, like a shadow. In 2023, Trieu is sentenced to more than a decade in federal prison for his role in the plot. The sentence is 11 years and 8 months, and even at sentencing, he tries to hold on to his version of the story. He tells the judge he never intended for the Hoon brothers to be murdered, and he says he was sick when he learned what happened. Through a Vietnamese interpreter, he says, "I never thought that they would do such a thing as they did, but that thing already happened. There's no way for me to change it." He also says he feels like he was stabbed in the back, like the real betrayal was what his own people did. But the judge is not buying the Clean Hands Act. U.S. District Judge Gene E.K. Prater tells him, "You can't just wash your hands of something because you didn't plan on it happening." That line lands like a verdict on the whole mindset. If you put the plan together, if you send the crew, if you call in the muscle, you do not get to act surprised when the muscle acts like muscle. During that same sentencing, lawyers argue over intent, but the facts stay ugly. Trieu's lawyer calls what happened pure evil, describing the tape over mouths, the stabbing, the throat slit, and the bodies tossed into the river, saying it is unimaginable to Trieu. But the judge shows little sympathy for the idea that Trieu is some innocent organizer who lost control. The prosecution also adds a key point that cuts through all the excuses. Mr. Trieu didn't lay a hand on the victims, but he was the one who set everything in motion. At the same time, the prosecutor also says something that feels brutally honest. Dead drug dealers don't pay debts, and Mr. Trieu wanted his money. That is the motive stripped down to the bone. The court also notes that Trieu cooperated after his arrest, assisting investigators and testifying at a trial of one of the men he sent, and that cooperation likely earned him a break at sentencing. But even with that break, the message is clear. Cooperation can reduce time. It does not erase responsibility, and the bigger theme is even darker. A gang name from a past era still pulled people into a modern river killing, like the old blueprint never really disappeared. By the end of this timeline, BTK is not described as an active Chinatown empire anymore, but you can hear why people still say the name with tension in their voice. It is like the brand never fully died, because the modern case proves the same pressure tactics can show up years later in a new outfit. Not protection money on Canal Street this time, but a drug debt, a kidnapping, and bodies weighted down with cement. And that is what makes it feel like a loop instead of an ending. So who was really pulling the strings behind the biggest hits? How many retired Thais are still active under the table? Did Thai ever stop being a shot caller, even from a cell? And if a name like BTK can still echo this loud, what else is sitting in the dark, waiting to wake back up? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.